Hello, friends, and welcome to the Nugget Climbing Podcast. I am your host, Stephen Dimmitt. Today's guest on the podcast is Mikey Schaefer. Mikey is an all-around climber whose accomplishments span all the disciplines in climbing, from putting up first ascents on all 7 of the skyline peaks in Patagonia, to putting up 513 plus big walls, to sport climbing 14A, to bouldering V10, and on and on. Mikey does it all at a pretty darn high level. We talked about the first big route that Mikey put up when he was 20 years old and some of the lessons he learned from getting in over his head. We talked about Liberty Bell up in Washington Pass and how that formation has played a role in the arc of Mikey's climbing career. The 13 plus Mikey and SJ put up on Liberty Bell is called Dark Side of Liberty, and you can hear a lot more about that route and the first ascent in my conversation with SJ in episode 11, if you're interested in that. Mikey and I talked about him being a jack of all trades and how he thinks about progressing in climbing, making goals, and how he balances all the disciplines. And we talked about his recent experiences with training and with bouldering and how adding those bricks to his pyramid has improved his climbing. Mikey is also a professional photographer and filmmaker who has worked on many major productions in the outdoor space, including Free Solo. We could have easily had an entire podcast episode about his work and his photography, but when I reached out to Mikey, he was more excited to talk about rock climbing. So we didn't really talk about his work. If you guys are interested in hearing more about that side of things, there's a great interview with Mikey on the Run Out podcast where he talks about his experience working on the Free Solo film, and I will link to that in the show notes. I will also link to a short film called The Force, which features Mikey and several of his first ascents in Patagonia. It's about 20 minutes long, and I would highly recommend that as well. This is part 1 of my conversation with Mikey. We ended up talking for nearly 3 hours, so I decided to split it up into 2 parts. Curious to hear what you guys think about that. I'd love some feedback. The second part will be available next week, and it's a pretty geeky conversation about some of the tricks Mikey has learned with big wall and multi-pitch climbing. I found it fascinating, and I think the tradsters out there or anyone who has an affinity for big wall climbing will get a lot out of it. It's crazy what this guy does. It's nuts. So tune in next week for that, and that's it. Please enjoy part 1 of my conversation with Mikey Schaefer.
Cause no one can do it like we do it, like we do it, like we do it. Cause no one can do it like we do it, like we do it, like we do it.
Hi, Mikey.
Hey there, how's it going, Steven?
Good, how you doing, man?
Oh, I'm hanging in there.
Yeah, totally. So in my prep for this, Mikey, this one thing popped up a few times, and I just had to ask about it. So SJ mentioned it. You and I got to hang out a little bit in early March, and it came up again, and then I was just reading an article, and it came up a third time. Tell me about the Eggsadilla.
Oh, yes, the Eggsadilla. Yeah, of all the things to be semi-famous for, yeah, some cooking.
It sounds legendary.
You know what? It actually is. I've probably had, I've easily eaten a couple thousand of them. I don't know. I mean, I've probably been eating the Eggsadilla for breakfast since 2002, I guess. So
every day?
Not every day, but I did some. I was on a Greek yogurt kick for a while.
Okay.
But no, so yeah, the Eggsadilla is like it is a little bit of a pass down. I was working in Yosemite as a climbing guide, and one of the other guides showed it to me. And it's just you crack a couple eggs into a frying pan and immediately slap a tortilla right on top.
Like on the goopy egg on the top.
Yeah, you usually I crack the yolks.
Okay.
With the shell real quick, and then just go like literally right on top. Eggs should not be cooked at all, and the eggs just fully bind right to the tortilla.
Okay.
And you just like medium heat, give it a second, and the egg will start to separate from the frying pan. Pick up the tortilla, flip it over. I add cheese and avocado, salt and pepper, throw another tortilla on top of there, brown both sides, and good to go.
Oh my gosh.
And so there's no mess. And so, you know, when you're like living in a van or also just trying to like eat while you're driving, things like that, it's absolutely perfect. So
I have to try this.
Yeah, no, it's great.
What's the bait on the tortillas?
Modified.
Do you have a favorite?
I'm a pretty standard flour guy. Now there's
Okay.
these like, you get the like bake yourself or fry yourself sort of tortillas. We use those a lot, but I'm honestly not that picky when it comes to my tortillas. So.
Okay.
Yeah, but no, I think it was even in like ESPN's, like they had some foods column thing. I mean, it made that, like, it's like literally been around. It's
From
kind
you.
of incredible. Well, I mean, I did not invent it, but
Right.
I do think I popularized it and passed it around to a lot of people.
Got
I
it.
couldn't tell you how many people I know. They're like, oh yeah, I eat those things all the time.
So it makes it onto ESPN through your enthusiasm for it.
Oh yeah, 100%. No,
Yeah.
it's totally been picked up a couple times on places like that, and you're just like, really? So, but it is handy. I mean, I maybe we'll do like a video sidebar to this that we in the show notes, and we can do a little demo or something.
Oh my gosh, I'd love to do that. That'd be perfect.
Yeah.
So you'd mentioned I think it was in the article that I'd read, that you got it secondhand from someone. You didn't invent it, but you thought you were the one that perfected it. Can you give me like a couple iterations, like a couple of the improvements is it toppings? Like what did you kind of
No,
tweak?
I don't know if it's like, it's more just like the messiness of it all, and just kind of I don't know if my improvements were necessarily like, I perfected it for my liking. How about that? I'm not sure I want to claim that I made the perfect one, because now I hear people, actually Max Tepfer just passed down some beta to me. He's
Okay.
like, oh, okay, when you go to do you brown the second side, he's like, throw some cheese on the frying pan and then fry the cheese on the outside of the tortilla real quickly. And so you get like this crispy cheese effect on the outside of the tortilla.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And so that was like recent beta to me. So I have a friend that swears you got to do it with mushrooms all the time. So it's you crack the eggs and then put up some diced mushrooms in there. So everybody, kind of takes it a little bit and changes it up. So
Love it.
yeah.
Well, Mikey, in reviewing your resume, I was overwhelmed. I've spent the last kind of day like reminding myself what you've done, and there's so many different directions we could go with this. I couldn't even decide what to do. So I texted you and I was like, hey, just tell me like what you'd be most interested to talk about. And I was really appreciative of your responses, and I'm really excited to dig into some stuff. I thought we could start with Dancing Dihedrals.
Oh, yeah. The route is actually called Little Big Man.
Little Big Man. Oh, okay.
Little Big Man, and it is a route up on the south face of Mount Bradley, up in the Ruth Gorge and
This is in the Alaska range?
Alaska range, yes. And it was like the first ascent I ever did, with my earliest kind of influential climbing partner, Blair Williams. And we went up there, that was 99, I believe, so I was just out of high school. And we were so green at that point. I mean, I had never done like a proper expedition. We were pretty much Yosemite climbers. We were just such a junk show. I remember like getting like, you fly up onto the glacier there and get dropped off. And we were like overweight getting on the plane. I remember us like putting all of our pitons and all of our hardware in our jackets so it wasn't weighed. And I didn't really realize it's like, this is actually kind of sketchy. We're like overweighting this, this small airplane, but it was just like, we need all these pitons. And so they were like in our jackets as we're getting on. And
oh, you're like, you're like hacking the plane capacity.
Totally,
by
absolutely.
Stashing a bunch 100%. Of metal in your jackets. Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah. Well, it'd kind of be like going through standard domestic check-in, right? You're like, my bags are almost overweight, and you start taking stuff off and like putting it in your pockets. And it's like, well, all the weight is actually going on the plane still, but they just don't have an accurate weight anymore. But yeah, so we get like dropped off in the glacier. And I mean, that's the first time I've ever been on a proper glacier. And I remember the plane took off, and it sort of starts flying at the south face of Mount Dickey. And it just keeps flying towards the mountain and flying towards the mountain. I'm like, oh my God, this is insane. What's he doing? Like, he's got to turn, he's going to like literally run into the mountain. And he just keeps flying. And then he like gets so far away and so small that the plane just disappears. And then I realized, I was just like, oh my God, that is a huge mountain.
Oh.
Like I had no idea the scale. Like I'd never seen mountains like that. I mean, the south face of Dickey, it's like the southeast face. I mean, it makes El Cap look like kind of no big deal. I mean, it's like a 5,000 foot face.
Wow.
The thing is absolutely ginormous, And so when you've never been to mountains like that, it's really hard to put it into perspective. There's no trees, nothing like that to just like give you an idea. And I think it really dawned on the both, the two of us who were just like, oh man, we are like actually in the mountains now. And so it was like the first time I ever put skis on to ski across the glacier. Blair I think he's like 8 years older than me. And so at the time I was 19 or 20. I guess it was right before my 20th birthday. And he was experienced, but I mean, the reality is we didn't really know that much about like being in the big mountains like that. And yeah, I mean, looking back, it's just like, it was a pretty like audacious thing to just go out and do at that age with, the amount of experience I had and just, I mean, honestly, the lack of knowledge. I mean, if somebody was to do that now, I would probably be like, oh, you're not really prepared. I'm not sure I would recommend you going to do that. You should probably be more skilled. You should just have more sort of, tricks in your pocket.
Right.
But we just didn't. And, I think that's kind of how we approached things back then. And I'm a lot more cautious now. And maybe part of that was just there wasn't as much information out there. It was a lot harder to gain sort of info and education. And I mean, we just had like such a wild time up there. We ended up spending 12 days, actually like 12 nights on the route.
Oh, man.
And then we had already fixed a few pitches to get up there. So, I mean, I think it's still probably the longest I've ever spent like on a wall route. I've had a few other 10-day trips, actually on the wall. But yeah, I think to this day it was still the biggest one. And we just had like so many epics up there. It was kind of amazing. Like looking back, I mean, at one point we got the haul bags stuck. We were lowering the haul bags out across this, like we did a 70-meter horizontal traverse.
Oh,
like almost
wow.
Dead horizontal. And in the middle of the low route between us, the haul bag had gotten stuck on a flake. So you can imagine, like, instead of lowering out like a big pendulum to the far anchor, it got stuck sort of in the middle on an edge, right? So now all of a sudden the rope is running, from my anchor, I just led the pitch like 35 meters onto a flake and then straight down.
Oh,
so
geez.
if the rope had popped off, we were about to drop haul bags, like they were probably 150 pounds onto the anchor. And then these are like natural anchors, right? And I just remember Blair's like jugging over and I'm like, hey man, like, are you going to lower out the haul bags? He's like, no, I already lowered them out. I'm like, well, I don't understand. They're not below me, like what's going on? So he's like, okay, well, like he like jugs over and he's just like, oh shit. Like they're literally like just the ropes behind a flake. There's like no gear for him to pull it off and like lower it out. And yeah, so it was like a natural belay, and I was just like, oh my god, we could get ripped off the mountain. So I was like, okay, hold on, and I ended up like building a 12-piece anchor. Like I literally just like I just ate it up. I just started climbing the next pitch, and it just put in as much gear as I could, and then I took our tagline and I made one gigantic master point, and then like transferred the load onto this new anchor. And then at one point he just grabs the rope, picks it up, and then like pulls it off the flake, and the haul bags just like tumble like 100 feet and like shock load the anchor, and I had like separated myself from that anchor. I'd built my own anchor. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to be completely separate. So if it fails, we're just going to lose the haul bags.
Yeah.
And it's not going to rip me off the mountain.
In half your rack.
Oh yeah. So, I mean, it was like, that's one example, but like, I felt like the whole thing was sort of like that, We were just like, yeah, I mean, we were pretty experienced aid climbers at that time. I'd probably climbed Del Cap, I don't know, 10 times already or something like that. And so, we definitely had some routes underneath our belt, but still, yeah, a lot of learning happened on that trip. And I remember when we finished wrapping, we got to the ground and it was like we had, I don't know, a few carabiners left and like a few stoppers.
Oh my gosh.
Everything was gone.
Oh my gosh.
We left we fixed a 70-meter rope, like tied it to an anchor, wrapped on it, tied a knot in the end of it, passed our other rope through it, and then double rope wrapped off the end of that rope. Because we were just out of gear, and we just walked away. We just like left the rope, and we were just like, yep, we're out. We're done. No more gear.
That's wild.
Yeah. So the flight home, the flight was a lot lighter. We didn't have to like sneak any gear in our pockets.
So for listeners, the route ended up being, what, 510 A3? About 20 pitches?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, 20 pitches with a 70-meter rope. I mean, that face is...
1,000 feet?
I mean, oh, no, it's like the size of El Cap.
Oh, it's okay. You know what? That was just the dihedral system.
That's just the dihedral. Yeah,
Got
it's it's a pretty similar dihedral to like the upper reaches of like El Cap on like the mirror wall or the nose or something like that. Just this huge, incredible, dihedral in line. Yeah, super great line. Definitely one I'm still quite proud of looking back, and especially given the experience that we had at the time. It's just like that one had some impact for sure.
So the Dancing Dihedrals part was just that 1,000-foot section?
Yep, one gigantic sort of dihedral where, I mean, I remember one pitch where it was 70 meters and pretty much every single piece was like a 1, 2, or 3 lost arrow.
Huh.
So, I mean, it was like you'd lead up like 40 feet, 50 feet, and we were like, okay, I'm out of pins. And then you'd lower down, and then you'd like back clean most of the pitch, pull them all out, jug back up, and then keep leading again.
Wow.
Because, I mean, we had a lot of pins. We probably had 60 pins or something with us, and, but only a few of them were really fitting in the pitch. And so, yeah, an amazing pitch. I mean, really similar, like I said, to something like on the mirror wall on El Cap. Just a perfect, huge dihedral.
So yeah, I read a quote from one of you guys, I'm not sure which of you, but the quote is that the Dancing Dihedrals are the most amazing dihedrals we have ever had the privilege of climbing. The rock on this route is superb. The climbing was reminiscent of that found on the classic El Cap routes. And that's cool. It sounds like it still stacks up, huh?
Yeah. And I mean, and the whole A3 thing is like a total joke, right? Like back then, like that was like when kind of aid ratings were changing. And I mean, even to this day, they're still so like... they don't really mean that much. They're so mental, right? So you never really know. But, I mean, A3 to us back then meant, like, you might hook, like, 5 moves in a row and place, like, a copperhead and then a beak and then hook a few more times.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, and that, I mean, so, like, an A3 could be, like, oh, yeah, you're looking at, like, 60, 70-foot falls.
Gotcha.
I mean, it was just, like, it was kind of like people were using this, like, new wave aid climbing ratings. It was like more modern, and so a lot of the like newish routes on El Cap were kind of using these new grades where, and I mean, something like A3 plus could mean you could take a gigantic fall, like a huge fall, but if there was low risk of hurting yourself, it wasn't really A4. So it's like you could fall 60 to 80 feet and be like, that's not A4.
As long as
and you're like,
if there wasn't a ledge,
like, okay. Yeah, like, but, taking a fall that big or, hooking that many times in a row, that many body weight pieces in a row, you're like, yeah. It was still, plenty scary. So, I mean, by no means is like, the 510 A3 like moderate. How about that? I'm sure if I went up there like this summer to climb it, I would be so scared. So I would be absolutely gripped. I sort of avoided climbing at all costs these days. I still am having to do it while doing first ascents, and I'm always up there kind of gripped. I'm always like, oh man, I don't believe I did this for like so many years when I was a kid. It was just like crazy. I was like, it's all I did, through my sort of late teens, early 20s was like a big wall aid climber. I just like lived on El Cap. So.
That's so interesting. So are you getting soft? Too much sport climbing and bouldering?
Oh, for sure. No, I mean, I'm getting old, it's just like, well, it's weird. It's actually like, my risk profile, it's something I sort of had to write an article on. And I mean, risk is a funny thing, it obviously, it sort of changes with time. I probably take higher risks in a way these days than I used to, but my quantity of risk is probably lower. So I'm more willing to do something that most people would probably deem sketchy, but I will not do it nearly as often as I used to.
Okay.
For sure. No, that part's really is changing in me. I mean, I sort of look at it like, I mean, you get a certain amount of rolls of the dice in your life. Like, that's it. I mean, I think it all adds up. I mean, eventually, if you just sit there, and play the game, like, something's going to happen. And it doesn't matter how good you are. It doesn't matter how much experience you have. Like, it just doesn't matter. Like, so for me, I've come to this like conclusion. I'm like, well, I don't need to risk as much as often as I used to, but when I do, I want to make it a little bit more meaningful. And I mean, I think part of that is just like the impact of kind of being in like elevated risky situations has like less benefit to me these days than it used to. Like it used to be more beneficial. I feel like there was more reward back then because it was all new to me.
Okay.
So I was more willing to take certain risks. Well, now it's like I've kind of like learned from those situations, and I've been through so many experiences that now it's like, well, I've already had that experience. Why would I take that risk? Like the value of my reward has gone down. So now it's like to get the reward, I actually have to risk more. But then to offset that, I just do it less often.
And how does that look now? Is that just like when you find the first ascent, when you find the line that is worth it, that inspires you and feels worth it? Or how do those moments come about now?
I mean, it's not even just first ascents. If it's alpine climbing, just adventure climbing.
Okay.
In general, like my desire is just lower. Like I don't plan as many trips. I don't have as much interest in just like, just going out and like doing really hard climbs, in the mountains and just going on trips anymore, like as often. Like I still want to do these trips, but just not as often is really the thing. And so, I mean, I find something, I'm like, okay, I think I'm really psyched on this. And then I'll do it, but it's just harder for me to get psyched on stuff that's just kind of like, okay, I've kind of been there, done that in a way, and I mean, it's really interesting. I look at just like my style of first ascents and like how I'm putting up rock climbs these days. And it is interesting. Like now if I'm like, oh, this is kind of run out, I'm like, I guess I should just put a bolt in, or, like before it would be like, nah, there's a stance up a little bit higher. I can keep climbing to there. And now I'm like, you know what? I bet everybody else is going to appreciate a bolt. Or when I forget how to do this move and I come back and try to repeat my own route, I don't want to be scared, So I kind of look at other people's perspective a little bit more.
That was going to be my next question. Yeah, that's really interesting. It seems like you've shifted more towards like, how do I make this route as enjoyable as possible for other people, especially if it's really good rock, etc.
Yeah, and that's always a balance. Is like when I start out to do a first ascent, it's like, okay, like whose experience am I doing this for, right? So, like there's plenty of first ascents that I've done where it's just like, well, this is just for me, like I'm up here to like have an enlightening, very personal experience with my partners, and that's all. In my head, the only ascent that matters is the one we are doing right now. And then with some of these like other rock climbs, it's like, no, wait a second, like I'm not the only person that's going to climb this. So I have to sort of think about how are the other climbers, what's their experience going to be like on this route. And as, more and more areas start to sort of become climbed out, there's not a lot of canvas left up there, right? So if I go up there and put up a route and, it's super run out or there's just something kind of janky about it, it's just like, oh, the bolt's in the wrong spot, or, oh, there should be a bolt here. And then people don't repeat it because I did a poor job putting the route up. I mean, it kind of sucks. I took that away from like the community. It's like, I don't own the rock or the formation, right? Even though I did the first ascent, so I just feel like there's a bit more of an obligation to do it right. If you're going to do it these days, make a route that can actually be enjoyed by future generation and other parties. And in the past, I don't know, I don't think I cared as much, and maybe I didn't realize how sort of finite of a resource we have in climbing. There's only there's a limited amount of routes. We're not just going to keep finding features to climb. Like they don't, obviously features fall off and then there's new features to climb, but that's pretty rare, right? So yeah, I mean that has definitely been a shift in my perspective, and I'm way more about like being like, okay, I want to make this a really good route for people to repeat. And that is very big difference. I mean, I just look at like a route I put up in probably 2004, 2005 up in Tuolumne Meadows on Fairview Dome. And I think it's only been repeated once or maybe twice in that time period. And there is no way I could go do it right now. Like there's no way I could repeat my own route.
Wow. Because
it's way too scary. I mean, it's out of my ability right now. Like, I mean, the route's only 11 plus, but there's a 10D pitch that's 220 feet long and it's got 5 bolts on it.
Oh my gosh.
And one of the 10 plus cruxes is like 30 feet above a bolt. on a low angle. I mean, this isn't like an overhanging wall, you know, you're
Right.
not just like falling into space. This is like, it's kind of insecure, slabby knob climbing. There's no way I would do that now. Like, I could not repeat my own route. And so, I mean, that I don't regret that experience, and I don't regret putting that route up in that way. But also moving forward, I know that like I probably wouldn't do that again, because ultimately, like, nobody's going to climb that route. You know, like, it's like, great, I had my experience, but nobody else really gets to, you know, enjoy it. And like, yeah, probably the odd climber is going to come along every 10 years and get psyched on these obscure sort of run out, you know, routes. But, and maybe that's good. Maybe there's still a place for that. You know, we don't want to sanitize all of it. We don't need to make, not every route needs to be climbable by every person, right? Because it sort of takes away that, like, that benchmark, you know, that skill. Yeah, and maybe it's just like I don't have that as much of that skill anymore. I'm just not as willing to go out there and push it for my own experience as much as I used to.
Well, I'm curious with that comment that you just made, and also with, you know, going back to Mount Bradley, being 20 years old and saying like, man, what we were doing was sketchy. I wouldn't recommend anyone doing it with the amount of experience that we had. I'm curious, how formative were those kinds of adventures and getting outside your comfort zone and making all the mistakes and kind of junk showing? Like, how important do you think that was for your own progression?
I mean, yeah, that's sort of the hypocrisy in it, right? Like, it was super important. Like, you know, like, I feel like I learned so much through all those early experiences, and it really gave me pretty good perspective of what I didn't know. I think my decision-making skills, I was forced into learning a lot at a young age and through a lot of serious experiences. And I think that did set the stage for the rest of my sort of climbing. I kind of realized, I was like, yeah, wow, I don't actually know that much, you know? And maybe the problem then lies in when, like, people go out there and do similar things, but they don't realize, like, what they should be learning from that experience. They don't come back and realize, like, oh, wow, okay, I need to work on this. I need to get better at this. I didn't know that, you know? And that's always hard. Like, you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
I mean, that's something we just humans always struggle with, right? And I mean, I know there's this classic graph out there of showing sort of like, you know, what you think you know as a beginner, what you think you know as a average climber, an advanced climber, and then what you think you know as an expert, you know? And essentially as an expert, you start to realize you're like, these are all the things that I don't know. And you become so much more aware of the parts that you don't know. And I think I did a good job early on realizing that I was out of my own ability. You know, level. Like I was in over my head. And that's a hard thing. We kind of celebrate that in climbing sometimes, right? We celebrate like that sort of enthusiasm to go out there and just go for it, you know? And I mean, okay, there's probably a good balance that with, like, you know, some rational thinking and being like, ooh, that's probably not actually safe, you know? But we do seem to celebrate like people really going for it and pushing the limit. It's just like, when you do that, I guess realizing that you got to figure out like what it is to like take away and learn from that experience. If you don't, it's sort of a waste, you know. If you just sit there and continue to like make the same mistakes over and over and over, it's just like you're not doing it right. You know, you missed the point. And, yeah, I mean, after my first couple of early expeditions, definitely the one to Alaska, and then we went to Patagonia in 2000. So I think it was like the winter after I went to Alaska. And I think that's when I really actually noticed how little I know. And I called it quits early on that trip. Okay. I felt uncomfortable. I just kind of realized, I was like, man, like, I shouldn't be here. I don't know enough. I don't have the skills to get myself out of an epic right now. Like, I don't know what I would do if X happened or Y happened. I don't know, you know? And so it totally dawned on me there. It's just like, I'm not good enough. I'm just not good enough. And I didn't go into the mountains for a long time. I didn't go into the mountains on climbs that are as serious, I guess. And I went to closer ranges. I didn't go off to these, remote ranges. I mean, back in 2000, like Patagonia in Chelten felt like really remote. Like, it's so different these days. Now it's like front country, but back then it felt like properly remote. And yeah, I mean, I came back and I was like, okay, I got to learn more. And that's actually, I ended up like really like living in Yosemite after that and becoming a climbing guide and just getting so much more mileage underneath my belt. And actually learning proper self-rescue, learning rope tricks, just like I started adding to the experience pool, like massively, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I just spent 250 days a year with my harness on for, you know, or more, you know. I mean, I was just climbing. I mean, I remember like years, it was like I had my harness on 29 days straight or something in August, you know, like, you know, I mean, and now that helps. I learned a lot, you know, and so now when I go back into the mountains, it's like, okay, I know how to do this. I know what to do now. And yeah, it's kind of interesting, right? Like, you want people to go out there and do things and really push themselves, but you hope that they understand why. And they're taking away the important parts of it and not just the successes they had. And, you know, always, you know, analyzing, it's like, well, what could have gone wrong there? What can I learn from this? And, you know, so if people do that, I think it's good to be out there pushing your limits.
One question that just popped into my head, and this goes back to that story you just told about the route that you wouldn't be able to go back and repeat now. I'm curious, how would you feel about people going back and kind of modernizing some of your old routes that fall into that category of things that you would probably do differently if you were to put them up now? Has that ever happened?
No, I don't think anybody's that I'm aware of has really added any bolts. No, maybe it's happened up on Father Tom and Middle Cathedral.
Okay.
I know the route's changed a little bit, is what I've heard. Or like some like long slings have been added to things so you can clip it from like lower, things like that. But which I don't know. I have sort of mixed feelings about that stuff. Like the route up on Fairview Dome, like I don't think it should be changed. I mean, it shows a moment in time, you know. It's like It is what it is now. You know, I don't know if I need to go back and change it. There's still other routes to climb. There's plenty of other routes to climb up there. It's not like it's a formation with 6 routes and like, you know, half of them are these like horror shows. You know, there's 40 routes on the thing, you know. There's plenty to climb. Like if that route only gets done once every 10 years, like that's the nature of that climb, you know. And so it is, you know. I mean, I don't think that's that big of an issue. I mean, yeah, I would be a bit bummed if somebody went up there and rat bolted and put bolts in everywhere, you know. And I guess I've always tried to not do that to other people's routes. You know, I've obviously free climbed around other aid climbs. I've, you know, kind of linked up some other features that have been maybe climbed before, and I've always tried really hard to be like, you know what, we got to still sort of preserve the experience they had because it is history. It is how they did it at the time, and it, you know, it shows their skill. So, you know, maybe in an area where there's more, where there's less opportunity, and, you know, somebody just completely botched a line, you're just like, oh man, this thing would be so much better if somebody just added a couple bolts or moved them around a bit, and, you know, maybe be a little bit more okay with it. But I think it's just it's every situation's different. You know, it's like one of those ones you can't just like, there's no proper analytical rule to it where it says a logical rule that says, oh, no, if then this. It's just like, I don't think that's true. I think you got to be up there and kind of, it's a little subjective. And I think that's the only way to approach it.
Well, Mikey, you have a resume that spans so many different facets of the sport and so many different areas. I mean, there's no way we can cover it all. You know, there's like this whole chapter of your life in Patagonia. You spoke to your chapter in Yosemite, and that's, you know, I'm sure neither of those chapters are closed. But if you're from the Northwest, like I am, if you spend a lot of time around Oregon or Washington, it's impossible to hear your name and not think of Liberty Bell. When we were talking over the last couple of days, I was asking you about things that you'd be interested in talking about. And one thing that you said is a lot of my climbing arc can be told through stories of experiences I've had on Liberty Bell. I'd love to hear about that. I'd love to hear kind of how that feature in that area kind of came on your radar and how that started, and maybe hear some of that arc.
Yeah, that mountain means a lot to me for sure. I'm pretty sure I've spent more time on Liberty Bell than anybody else ever. You know, I mean, just total amount of days. Like, I mean, I know there's some guides that go up there and guide, you know, like some of the classic routes, and they've spent a lot of days up there, but just like sheer volume of days, like, you know, it's like sort of hard to add up now of how many days from my just early ascents of the classics to the routes I've free climbed, to the routes I've repeated, and to the routes I've established. So yeah, I mean, growing up in Washington, and always...
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Tacoma.
Okay.
Yeah. And I was always sort of drawn to adventure climbing and big wall climbing. I was just thought that is what you did. That was the sort of the progression. Like, to me, was sort of climbing. A lot of other, if it was like sport climbing or gym climbing, that was like literally sort of training or fun climbing. But like the climbing that mattered was just like adventure, big wall, expeditions. Like that was it to me. Like that's just what I thought climbing really meant as you progressed. And I would say growing up in Washington, then like Liberty Bell is kind of our big wall. Like that's our big formation. The east face of Liberty Bell is sort of the most classic, big wall formation in Washington. So, I mean, I couldn't tell you like when I heard about it the first time, but I don't know, probably, I was 14 or something like that. And I started climbing when I was 13. And all those years are obviously a little bit hazy at this point in my life. I've never been good about keeping track of dates and having notes, and I don't have a journal or anything like that. So whenever I use dates and times, it's take it with a grain of salt. Like I could easily be a couple years off. I don't know. It's always been unimportant to me. But I mean, I think the first time I went up there to climb Liberty Bell was, I think I was 14 or 15. I mean, I couldn't drive yet. That I know for sure, 100%. And yeah, my partner at the time, Blair, who I went up to Alaska with, we did our first, well, at least my first big wall was up there on a route called Thin Red Line.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, so, I mean, now everybody thinks the Thin Red Line is like, oh, that's like the classic free climb of Washington, essentially. Like, that's our, to use a cliche, that's our Astroman. I mean, for sure. Like, Thin Red Line is like the Astroman of the Northwest.
Is it 12 minus?
Yeah, it's like mid 512.
Okay.
Just straight
mid 512.
12B, 12C, I don't know, 512. But back then, I mean, you look in the old Becky guidebook, it was like a grade 5, like A3.
Oh, wow.
I mean, most people fixed pitches and then either drug a portaledge up there or slept on like pitch 9 or pitch 10. Like, it was a proper big wall. Like, you had to nail, and you had to bring pitons for it. Like, it was an 8 climb. Like, there was maybe the first pitch you would free climb, and which was like 510, and then after that, I think you 8 climbed, I don't know, 6, 7 pitches in a row of proper tinkering. Like there's some fixed heads and some knife blades, and so the first time I ever slept in a portaledge was up there. Yeah, on Thin Red Line. And we actually, Blair and I shared a single portaledge because, we couldn't like afford 2. And I think we borrowed even the one we slept in. They're really expensive, especially for, being a teenager, right? You can't just go throw down $500 on a portaledge.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, that was definitely like one of the earliest, sort of routes that I like hauled on and then slept on it. And then we, came back and I did Liberty Crack in a day, which is like one of the 50 classic climbs in North America, also as an aid climb. And I mean, back then it was just like everything on it was an aid climb over there. That's just that was like kind of the aid climbing destination. And then I moved to Yosemite in, my late teens, early 20s, and I, climbed a lot on El Cap, and then you start seeing a lot of these like big walls, be free climbed. I mean, and definitely during that time is when a lot of the action was happening on El Cap. The Huber brothers were sort of like showing what was possible of like free climbing all these, older aid climbs. And yeah, it was interesting. And then I returned kind of to the Northwest. I mean, I was always going back for the winters to hang out with my brother and my family and do some climbing, but it wasn't until I was sort of done guiding and in Yosemite and could climb in other places during the summer. I remember going back up to Liberty Bell and sort of like looking at it differently because I'd spent all this time in Yosemite, and I was just like, oh, wait a second, like just because they're aid climbs doesn't mean they can't be free climbs, And so yeah, I kind of set my eye on Thin Red Line, and I feel like I really like applied the tactics that I had learned in Yosemite from like what other people were doing, and just sort of having a different vision and being able to like look at things differently and being like, oh, wait a second, like, that's only A3, like, I bet there's a chance it's a free climb. So yeah, I think just like those years of being away from it and then being in Yosemite really just shifted my perspective of what is like kind of possible. So yeah, I think I free climbed Thin Red Line in 2008, and it had been attempted maybe a couple times before, but there was one pendulum on it that people couldn't really figure out, and I don't think anybody else sort of had the vision to be like, oh, well, we can just go around that. They were sort of just trying to free the actual line, and I was like, what? But if we like, climb down and around and over here, and like put a couple bolts in, and like we can climb around it. Yeah, so I think that was 2008 that I did that, and then At one point, I freed Liberty Crack kind of for the second free ascent. Liberty Crack's kind of got a complicated free climbing history to it. It's too much to even get into, I would say. There's a lot of asterisks.
Okay.
Everybody's got asterisks on that one until I went back again. It took me multiple tries to get rid of all the asterisks. But I did that one, I don't know, maybe like 2010 or something like that. And then
Did that end up going free at like 513?
Yeah, it's like 13 minus.
Okay.
If you're normal height, I would say if you're short, it's actually a little easier.
Interesting.
Yeah, I didn't actually find it to be 513. So, but again, I think that's just due to my size. If you're like a full-size human, it's probably a fair bit harder. Yeah, sometimes it pays to be, short. So, and then again, my dates are always so off. But, and then I forget what year it was. I did my first like proper new route up there, which was just to the right of Thin Red Line. And I ended up doing that route all by myself. I couldn't really find anybody to get psyched on it. So I ended up doing that one all by myself. I ended up even rope soloing it for the send.
Oh, no kidding.
It's like 12C or something like that. It's got a couple pitches of 512. And it's probably the hardest thing I've ever just like properly rope soloed.
Is there a quick way to describe for listeners what that means? What your actual approach was and how you do that?
Well, yeah, you fix one end of the rope to the anchor, and then you put the gree on your harness, and then as you climb up, you just feed rope out through the gree. And
lead climb it, place gear, clip up.
Climb it, place gear, that part's all like normal. It's just that the gree-gree's attached to you instead of your partner. And then the rope is tied to the anchor instead of you. So you're just like flipping those two attachment points. And so then you're just doing double duty. The biggest problem is that, nobody's holding the brake strand. Mm-hmm. Right? So, whenever you're gripped, it's sort of like you look down, and if your player was like talking to somebody else with their hand off the gree, that's essentially what it's like all the time, right? You're up there and you're just like, cool, Blair's not paying attention except the Blair's me, like nobody to blame but myself right now.
Blair's incredibly preoccupied with his hard climbing.
Totally, like trying to send the move. I'm like, I should grab the brake strand, but I got to hold on with my other hand. So then
at the top of the pitch, you have to fix the line, lower down, clean all your stuff, and then jug back up?
Climb it again.
Okay.
Yep.
Got it.
Exactly. So it takes a while. I mean, it's not a huge route by any means. I think I did 5 new pitches. They're long pitches, but so I would have been probably happy to have a partner, but then it kind of dawned on me. I was hoping the climbing was going to be harder than it actually was, and I was hoping the line was going to be like 513 and just keep me a little bit more interested. And so one of the ways I thought I was like to make it a little bit more interesting was to just rope solo it in the end. I was just like, okay, well, with a belay, I think this would be pretty casual outing for me. And so I was like, oh, well, this will make it more interesting. I'll just go and rope solo it. So, it was a fun way to just sort of, go up there and do it myself. And then I definitely spent a lot of time in Yosemite at that point rope soloing things. I mean, I put up there out on Liberty Bell after I put up Father Time on Middle Cathedral. Okay. And I self-belayed a lot of that thing.
Oh, wow.
Not on the send, but to put the rope up and to lead it. I mean, I probably soloed 65-70% of it or something like that. Okay. So I'd kind of gotten my system dialed for sure.
And that's a 13B on Middle Cathedral. I actually talked about that one quite a bit with Katie Lambert. If people are interested, check out that one. We talked a lot about that route. It was pretty fun. Yeah,
we could, again, that's like one of those routes we could probably spend, a whole episode on. It's like, I spent years of my life up there, so I'm sure we can easily talk about it for a while. Yeah, so, but anyways, and again, almost to bring back my experience in Yosemite and then to, Liberty Bell, it was like, I kind of was like, okay, I learned these skills in Yosemite and now I was applying them up there on Liberty Bell. So that was called Liberty and Injustice. And then I did another route a couple years later called Slave to Liberty, which is like 13B or something, which really takes it's actually the king line up the mountain. It's like the most front and center, like longest route, like, it's what you see. I mean, it is just like the plumb line up the mountain. And again, like that was just kind of, for me, a progression it was quite hard. There's I don't know 5 pitches of 512 or so, and then a pitch of 513, and pretty darn hard and insecure 513, sort of like slab climbing. Okay. Pretty gross, I would say. Really hard, just grabbing razor blades and dime edges. And yeah, and I mean, at the time I was just like, I remember being pretty proud because I was like, oh, I think this is like the hardest, essentially, multi-pitch route in Washington now. Maybe there was routes that had, you know, some 513 on them, but I don't think there was anything sort of as stacked at the time as that thing. I think that was it, you know, like that was the top of the game for, you know, for the Northwest. But unfortunately, it's not actually like that great of a route. There's some good climbing on it, but the crux pitch is like less than desirable. It's probably one of the worst pitches on the route. And like, I would never, like, if it was at the crag, it probably wouldn't get climbed, you know? So it sort of left me feeling a little bit like bummed in a way, because I thought that would be the one. I was like, okay, this is the one. This is going to be like the benchmark modern hard route. But I just don't think it's ever going to be that. It's just not good enough. And which, yeah, I mean, yeah, it kind of did disappoint me in a way, because it was like, I think it would be cool having, you know, just growing up in Washington, having been climbing there for so long, and like starting really at the ground level, and then to sort of to put up the route, right, that like the young kids can eventually aspire to, you know. I think there's something cool, and maybe that's just like ego or something like that, like to know that it's like, oh cool, I like put up, you know, sort of the hardest multi-pitch rock climb up there in the state. I don't know, but I do know I was like, oh, this is sort of unfortunate that like it's not actually better.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
But then you ultimately you found it, right? You found the gem?
Yes, yeah, exactly. And I think, thankfully, I just, you know, I spent so much time up there, hiking up there to that east face, you know, a lot of time by myself. And it turns out when you're by yourself, you know, it's easy to be a bit lazy. You know, you don't really have to, like, if you sit around for an hour, you're not really disappointing anybody but yourself. Which is one of the hard parts of like doing routes by yourself, right? It's just that there's nobody there to disappoint, right? You're just like, yeah, I'm gonna just sit around, or like I'm gonna hike up to the base and just like lounge for a couple hours. Well, you know, a partner would be like, dude, what are you doing? Even though maybe they want to do the same thing, but they wouldn't say that, right?
Right, totally.
Yeah, it's like kind of like you're a bit of a poker face always. You're like, no, I'm totally psyched. Oh yeah, I'm psyched. And then you guys get psyched, right? But if you don't have a partner, that's a lot harder to do. It's harder to lie to yourself, it turns out. So I just spent a lot of time, you know, sort of staring up at the wall. I mean, I've always just loved like looking up at cliffs and just sort of understanding like what's been climbed, like really gaining like an intimate knowledge of something and just being like, oh, that's that line. Oh, that's that line. Like I know every corner, every feature that's ever been climbed on it, right? And I can look up at Liberty Bell and just be like, oh yeah, that feature right there, maybe it's only 60 feet long, hasn't been climbed, or that's been climbed. You know, I mean, every single feature on it, you know, as far as the east face goes. And then I kind of realized, I was like, well, that feature over there hasn't been climbed. And it looks really chossy from the ground. The first couple pitches are kind of blocky and like covered in lichen. And I was just like, oh man, I don't think this is going to be very good. And I think that's what most people thought at the time. I remember sort of texting Blake Harrington, who's definitely spent a lot of time up on Liberty Bell as well. And he's like, oh yeah, that chossy face, you know, over there on kind of the, you know, above the chalkstone. I was like, yeah, that thing. And I mean, literally he said chossy in his reply, you know, and then SJ and I like ended up wrapping in on it, and it was like the exact opposite of Choss. It was amazing. Just like immaculate rock, like super cool features and crimps and holds, and like, I mean, I was blown away. I mean, I was just like, after spending so much time up there, you think I would know better, right? But it sort of goes to show you still just got to go inspect it. You got to go look. It's like, I don't know everything about it, you know? And so, you know, we wrap in and have a look, and it is just like, holy shit, this is like absolutely amazing
rock. My gosh, that's so cool. Could you tell right away?
Oh yeah, no, I mean, so we climbed a sort of an adjacent route and traversed in, and I think we just wrapped in like from the halfway point down. Okay. And which looked like it would be the hardest. So I was like, okay, let's check that stuff out. And so anyways, yeah, we checked that out, and it was just totally like, I was like, oh yeah, this is it. This is the line. This is the one, actually. I mean, it was like dead obvious to me. I mean, I think I've just done enough new routes, and I've rock climbed long enough, I can just kind of look at something and be like, yep, that's going to go. That's going to be hard. You know, I mean, I don't know how hard I thought at the time, but I mean, I feel like I was like, oh yeah, that's probably 13 plus, you know, or 13C or somewhere along those lines. And sure enough, I mean, it's ended up being 13 plus and sort of.
Right.
It sounds like it might be a little debatable how hard it actually is. Yeah.
I talked quite a bit with SJ about this one, and specifically about what you just alluded to about the grade. And I think anyone listening to this that wants to hear more should go listen to the interview with SJ, because it's a really funny story. Just the boulder and the grade and kind of the whole discussion about that whole thing.
Yeah, no, the SJ and I, we had a lot of debate up there of how hard it is, that's for sure. I have been called a sandbagger for sure, which I have always sort of taken offense to.
Interesting. Okay.
I personally don't feel like I'm a sandbagger. I think sandbaggers do it with malicious intent. I think people that I would call sandbaggers are doing it to throw somebody off, or there's some sort of ulterior motive behind saying, oh yeah, that's only that hard, And I honestly don't. That's not why some of my routes apparently. I don't feel like that's true. That the grades I've proposed for my own climbs, I just don't think that is accurate. Up there on Liberty Bell, it's I've spent a lot of time climbing on granite, right? I've practiced that style of climbing a lot more than SJ has. So it would make sense that we can climb the same thing and she's going to think it's harder. She's less practiced at it, right? So possibly for her own personal experience, okay, maybe that is 514, but for me, it's just I've just done this so much that it's just no. I mean, there's one finger crack in particular that was she's it's 512, it's 512, it's 512, and I'm I think it's mid 511, I'm just this is this even a thing, I'm just you just stem up it, and there's all these no hands rests, and and she keeps falling off of it. I'm really? And then it's interesting, by the end, she's sort of, as she gained experience on that pitch, she's okay, maybe it's 11 plus, and I think that's a very compressed sort of experience that shows, how experience can change the perception of how hard it is. And, it's just that my sort of time of experience is much greater on granite than hers, so it makes sense that the overall grade for me just sort of feels a bit easier. But anyways, yeah, I mean, I might have been in better shape than I thought too. I don't know, but
interesting.
I do think, in the end, it's I wouldn't be surprised if most people would go up there and be yeah, I think that's 514.
Got it.
With a V10 Crocs, and definitely after spending the next winter bouldering in Bishop and doing a handful of V10s, it sort of made me look back on the thing on Liberty Bell being ooh, yeah. I guess that is V10 because that took way more tries.
Interesting.
Way more tries. It's the sort of thing I couldn't do the moves for days up there. I couldn't even get in the right body position for a few days. But I was never much of a boulderer, so I don't know. I'm I have no idea. I'm I don't know. Does that mean that's V8? I don't know. I mean, I honestly had no idea how hard I could boulder. So, we're up there proposing a bouldering grade because it's kind of a boulder problem move. And so I'm just oblivious. But then after spending a couple months in Bishop bouldering, and it was just oh, wait a second. I'm flashing V8 and doing V9, V10 in a day. I was huh. I was yeah, maybe that thing's a little harder than I thought on Liberty Bell. So,
right.
but again, it's the difference is it's it wasn't malicious. I wasn't oh yeah, I'm gonna
totally
rate this thing 13, minus, and I want to see others go up there and get totally schooled and pushed around. That was not it at all. I was just being honest. It's just okay, I think this is how hard it is for me.
Totally. And to your point, it is so hard to grade things in that style. I mean, if anyone's gone to Leavenworth and tried to climb a V10 slab boulder, or I don't know, a V2 slab boulder for that matter, some of that stuff feels so incredibly hard. It's so different from having a route or a boulder where you can climb on holds, grab holds and pull on them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think I've gotten pretty good at doing routes without holds, for sure, 100%. I mean, just lots of time on granite, turns out, and I've just climbed a lot of less than vertical hard routes in Yosemite, and, it practiced, turns out, and a lot of people shy away from that style of climbing because it's generally not that much fun until you kind of figure it out and get better at it. And it's just not as obvious of a style as, more classical sport climbing, or, something that's steeper with more holds. And, it's like the antithesis of sort of fun sport climbing. Mm-hmm. So it makes sense why I guess people repeat some of my routes and be like, well, that's really hard. And it's just like, yeah, you probably haven't done as much of it as I've done. So I don't know. I mean, I think all we can ever do when we rate climbs is like rate them through your own experience. It's like, how could I rate it through somebody else's experience? I don't know what it's like,
Right.
So I like to think I'm honest, but I've also learned that apparently like my scale is a little off. And so now whenever there's any question, I just err on the side of like rating it harder.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. I mean, I think there's like kind of two philosophies of grading that are, neither of them are malicious or any of those things that you were they don't carry those connotations that you were kind of alluding to. But one is like, let's try to grade it dead middle of the grade, like as spot on as possible. And then the other philosophy is more like, there's no way it could possibly be any easier than X grade, so I'm just going to give it that. And it seems like you fall a little bit more into the latter category, a little more conservative. Yeah.
I think so, and that's just the time, again, spent in Yosemite. And I think climbing in the Northwest, it indexed a lot, like where the grades were hard, where 512 was like legit. You have to earn it, even to this day.
Right.
Even to this day, you got to earn it. And then, lots of years at Smith Rock, too. A place where you got to earn it. I mean, I've just never really spent time in places that are known for their sort of like giveaway grades. Like I just... Unfortunately, I look forward to going to Greece, for some honeymoon climbing at some point, I just haven't got to go to those places. So I think it's just part of it's just, my experience of climbing areas where it's really technically demanding climbing. Mm-hmm. It's conditions dependent. It's a very particular style. And so then when you get people that aren't used to that particular style, that aren't good technical climbers, that don't understand like how important conditions are. They come and be like, oh, that thing's so hard. And you're like, well, yeah, but you haven't done this before. So yeah, but anyways, I am erring on the side of like, maybe that is a little bit harder than I think, I guess. And I don't know, maybe it really also comes down to me just always being like, not thinking I'm as strong as I am, always being a little like, yeah, but I'm not actually that guy, I'm not actually as strong as so-and-so, or like, I'm just not that strong.
Yeah.
And that's probably just something that I've always thought, and
that's interesting.
And I just don't look at myself in the same league as a lot of people, and other people would probably argue with me about that, and be like, no, you're totally, and I'd be like, no, that dude's really strong, it's like, he's A team, and I'm like solid like B leaguer, sort
of.
Where
do you think that comes from?
Maybe it's just like growing up in Washington. The attitude there is a little different than like it's just like a little bit more reserved. I don't know. Just always like, never really feeling like like I was that great of a climber. Like, I mean, I'm not scared to say I'm a good climber. But it's hard for me to self-describe myself as a great climber. Like, I don't know. Like, I look at other people and I'm always just like, oh no, that guy's a great climber, and I don't know, I'm not sure what it is, like why that is by any means. And
I mean, I wonder if part of it's just how well traveled you are and the work you do, the photo work you do for Patagonia and meeting a lot of the best climbers in the world. Maybe you just have a different paradigm, or your paradigm has shifted from how most people think of hard climbing.
Yeah, and I think that is probably true. I mean, it's like I've been fortunate enough to climb with literally some of the strongest climbers in the world. It's like, I've been on a bouldering trip with Alex Megos. I was in Sayus with them. I've got to climb with Tommy. I've roped up with Honnold quite a bit, and Josh Wharton. Like a lot of these guys. And when I compare myself to them, it's just like, no, I'm in a different league. That's just obvious. And maybe like when you're not as good and you don't have as much experience and you look at the people above you, it's kind of compressed, right? You're just seeing kind of the back of it, right? That's all you're seeing. And it's just like, oh, those people are so much better. It's really hard to differentiate how large of a gap there is, or sort of a spread of ability up there. But then when you're like closer to it, it becomes a little bit more obvious of like, oh no, like that guy's really strong, And maybe that's sort of that, kind of like that chart I mentioned, is like, as you become an expert, you start to really realize how little you know and how not strong you are. Because you see somebody that is so ungodly strong, and you're like, yep, that guy's a great climber. You know, I'm still just a good climber. So, and I mean, I also think part of that is just that, like, I have never spent a lot of time trying to master any one aspect of the sport. I've jumped around a lot, you know. I mean, it's the classic, you know, jack of all trades, master of none sort of thing that, like, it's like, oh, maybe I'll sport climb for a few years, but then I'll, like, get psyched on, you know, adventure climbing again, or new routing, or alpine climbing, or mixed climbing. And the reality is, I mean, you've only got so much energy to go climbing and time. And if you spread all that energy and time out amongst a bunch of different disciplines, like, it's really hard to get good at all of them, or to get great at all of them. I think you can get good, but there's very few examples of people that are great at all the disciplines of climbing. I mean, we're talking, that's like, you know, the upper pyramid, where there's, like, I mean, I don't know, I'm talking less than 5 climbers in the world, you know, where I'm like, they're great at all of it. You know, they're like V14 climbers, they've climbed M10, they've alpine climbed, you know, they sport climb, you know, 9A, like, there's not that many people, right, that do that. I mean, that is like a very, very small subset of the climbers out there. And so I think that maybe that's part of it. It's just like, I have tried to, like, be good at all those things, and then that's hurt my overall ability in each form of climbing, you know, which is fine. I am totally okay with that. And I think, you know, the one benefit of sort of working on all the different disciplines is they do really help each other out. I mean, I've always looked at it sort of this, like, this spiral, right? And if you kind of continually sort of move through the disciplines, they all elevate each other. You know, as you climb, you're able to do things that might mix, like 513 rock climbing, M8, really hard bouldering, like altitude climbing, you know. But if you just had focused on sport climbing, like, there's a lot of things that you couldn't do because, like, they require other skills. Yeah, I've always looked at it like, okay, I did this for a while, now I should go back to this. And hopefully what I learned from bouldering is going to help, you know, my sport climbing, which is, like, the most obvious one, right? You know, it's like, okay, you want to become a better sport climber, just get stronger, you know, like, get stronger, like, make V10 easy. 514 is going to feel a lot easier, right? So that's like kind of, I think, the obvious one, you know. But then people don't realize, well, okay, now you're a stronger sport climber, crack climbing and traditional climbing definitely can get easier. Okay, and now as that's gotten easier, free climbing El Cap also going to get easier. But you know what else makes free climbing El Cap easier? Being an egg climber and a big wall climber, right? So I think it all sort of feeds itself, and that allows you to continually be moving upwards without just focusing on one sort of dimension and one sort of siloed approach to climbing. And I think the things I've, like, always been drawn to and still are somewhat drawn to just do require a variety of skills. You know, like, I mean, I think a good example is, like, I got a free climb the southeast ridge of Cerro Torre, which was, like, the second free ascent. David Lama did the first ascent, and a lot of people know it from, you know, he did a big sort of movie about it, and there's a lot of controversy sort of also behind it. But, I mean, that thing was proposed, like, 513B in the Alpine. Right, where you had to, like, I mean, the first 8 pitches were, like, you know, you had to have crampons and ice tools on it, and then, you know, like, there's just a variety of climbing. And if I hadn't spent all that time working on all those different skills, like, there's no way I could have done that thing. So, you know, I look at that climb, and that was probably a great climb. I mean, that was probably, like, the closest I've maybe ever been to being a great climber, almost, you know, was on that. Because I was able to, like, use all of these other skills I had that I'm good at, and I put it all together and was able to be like, oh, no, like, that was a great climb. But those are few and far between. I mean, it's just, there's not a lot of routes like that, and you know, and you only get lucky and, you know, are able to have those sorts of experiences maybe a handful of times in your career where it all sort of comes together, where it, like, suits you perfectly. And, you know, and then there's all the environmental variables of just, you know, the actual weather and having time and conditions and partners, and so many other things need to come into play, you know. And I do look at that one and be like, okay, like, it all kind of came together then, of, like, all of my skills as a climber. Like, I would not have been able to do that if I hadn't been sport climbing previously. And most people be like, what? That's like a gigantic alpine climb. Cerro Torre is like one of the hardest, you know, used to be one of the hardest sort of mountains to stand on top of, right? And most people would not, like, sort of be like, oh yeah, you got to be a strong sport climber to do that thing. But I mean, ultimately, like you look at my partners, I was with Josh Wharton and Andrew Rothner, and I was like, Rothner climbs like V14 and Wharton climbs like, I don't know, I think he's done V14 and, on-site's 513, like it's kind of no big deal,
Mm-hmm.
So I just think it shows that sort of importance, right, to have that sort of ability and all the other disciplines to like do something like that.
So, Mikey, with that, I would love to dig into what drives you to pursue all the disciplines. I'm curious, have you always just wanted to be the jack of all trades, or is it just that you enjoy variety and you get tired of one thing and want to do the next thing? Or is there some element of that objective that you just described? Was it on Cerro Torre?
Yeah.
Is that like what it's all for, and you've kind of had that in the back of your mind from the beginning? How do you think about that?
I mean, honestly, I think one of the reasons that I kind of jump around through the different disciplines is to not get bored with climbing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want climbing to be boring. I don't want it to feel monotonous. And I think by like moving around, a lot, continually sort of like getting better at something and then being like, okay, I'm going to move on. Like it's allowed me to stay pretty darn psyched. I think most people would consider me as like a pretty motivated climber still. Mm-hmm. I'm not hyper motivated by any means. I'm not an overstoker climber. I don't think anybody would really ever say that about me, but I've had a consistent sort of motivation and upward trajectory for 28 years now of climbing, and I think a lot of that is really due to the fact that I've just been like, okay, like I should go do something else now. Just don't get bored with it. And I don't know if I realized that from the beginning, like that was not some sort of decision I made. I was like, oh yeah, like this is gonna like create this sort of long-term, career for me by doing it this way. Like I didn't know. I think that's easy to say in retrospect mm-hmm. now of like why I've done it this way. But yeah, I think it's just helped me sort of stay psyched and just get better at things. And maybe it was the era I grew up in of climbing too. I mean, I grew up with going to a lot of like climber slideshows with like the likes of like Alex Lowe and Conrad Anker and, guys like that you were like, oh wow, like these guys are good at all the things, and maybe that was just like those people I was just naturally drawn to sort of that style of climber, not this hyper-focused, siloed approach, where they just get really, really good at one thing. I don't know. I was not fascinated with those people as much. I wasn't as impressed by them. And, and again, maybe it's just like this adventure sort of thing in me that likes to go do routes that just require more skill. And it's interesting. I think it is just partially a personality trait, because if I was to look at my my career in sort of like photo video world, I'm also a bit of a jack of all trades.
Interesting.
Like I'm totally the Swiss Army knife on productions, like 100%. I mean, I've gotten hired, sort of on productions almost without like a defined role. Without even like some specific need, but the end, once we're like in the production, I morph into whatever is sort of needed, because I've kind of practiced it all and I've gotten good enough at all of it that I can sort of just fit in and take these sort of skills, if it's being a camera operator or being a camera assistant or a sound guy or I mean even a director or a producer. I mean, I've literally gotten credits for like all of those things at this point, more or less. So, which is pretty rare also in like the film world. Like you don't see that as much. People are like, they do one thing and that's what they do. So I don't know. I think that's just who I am. It's not that I get bored with things, that I like to understand how all parts of something works. And that includes climbing. I look at climbing as a whole, and there's a lot of parts to it. And so really understanding like how it all works.
I'd love to hear where you're headed now with climbing. I've kind of witnessed a couple transitions in your climbing. We've spent a lot of time together at Smith, and I kind of got to see you really put your head down and kind of have your first proper sport climbing season. You were trying to break into 514, and you did it pretty fast. And since then, you kind of did the same thing with bouldering. You're like, I kind of want to do more of that. I wonder if I could climb V10. And then it sounds like you climbed a bunch of them within the first couple months of your season. But I'm curious about that. Is that just what feels fun and interesting to you now? Or are those things kind of rounding out skill sets that you hadn't put as much time into for some greater objective? Tell me about that.
I mean, as far as the first part of the question, it's like kind of like where I'm going.
Yeah.
Man, I've never known. I've never had a 6-month plan.
Okay.
Literally, like, and it bothers SJ, I think, sometimes, you know, my girlfriend. Because she's so good at, like, making plans and, like, goals and objectives and all these things. And, I mean, I have literally never done the, like, oh, I'm going to write down my goals for the year. I've never done that in my life. I mean, I have short-term goals, and I work towards those goals, and those goals are maybe 3 to 6 months. And what I've found is, though, is, like, it allows me to be pretty open for what comes at me and like what makes the most sense, like what's presented to me at the time, and then I make a decision. But I don't make decisions before I'm presented with the opportunity, I guess.
Okay.
Like, I don't know, like I have no idea what I'll climb in the next 6 months. No idea. I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell you if I'm going to go bouldering or new routing or I don't know. It's just kind of like I'll do something, and then along the way it's like another opportunity will arise, or I'll see something, or I'll get psyched, or, you know, it's just like, oh, my schedule's changed, and, you know, now I know I'm going to have 6 weeks off in September. And then I just sort of look at like, okay, well, what makes the most sense? You know, what am I able to train for? Like, you know, do I want to stay home? Do I want to travel? Like, what haven't I been doing? Right. So all those things, you know, I kind of throw it into the equation and then just be like, okay, well, maybe I should do this right now. I think this would be the most beneficial for me, the most interesting. It just makes the most sense, as opposed to like setting some goal a year out and not really knowing like what my life's going to look like at the time. Right? Like I might have a job. I mean, the weather might suck. Like, who knows? And then it's all of a sudden, you know, if I spend all this time maybe, you know, focusing on that thing, and I get there and I realize, oh, that was like totally the wrong decision. So maybe it's just that I like putting off the decisions until I have to make a decision, right? Like I don't want to set out and make some decision when it's like so far out and I don't actually know all the variables, right? And I mean, I like to think I'm pretty analytical, and so maybe that's part of it. You know, I'm not driven as much by just these sort of ideas that are floating out there. You know, it's just like, oh, okay, I'll see where I'm at when the time comes. So yeah, as far as like, you know, where am I going with my climbing? Oh man, it's just so hard to say. It's just like, you know, I'm probably going to stay on the spiral track. You know, it's like
nice.
I went bouldering for a while, and I mean, right now, if it wasn't for, you know, sort of COVID, I think I would be in Yosemite trying to put up another route on Middle Cathedral.
Okay.
You know, which is such a departure from bouldering, right?
Right.
I mean, it's like if bouldering,
the biggest
you know,
departure, perhaps.
Totally, it's like you throw your crash pad down at the base, and then you're just like, sweet, I'm going to try this thing, and then we're done in 4 hours. You know, We're like, you know, a new route on Middle Cathedral is like setting off on this like multi-year endeavor where it's going to be 50, 60, 70 days of effort and toiling, and like, I mean, it is such a different thing. I mean, they're barely in the same like league of climbing, and that's what I had sort of thought I was doing, but now you look at, you know, what's going on, and it's just like, well, who knows what I'm going to be doing. So, and I think that's a little bit more magnified just given the current situation we're all in, of just being like, how do you make a plan right now?
Yeah,
you know?
Totally.
Yeah. And so I actually haven't. Like, this is, and I won't lie, this is probably the least motivated I've been in a really, really long time. And I'm like totally okay with it. I mean, I haven't been training. I haven't been on the hangboard. And I mean, I watch, you know, SJ, it's like come home from work and she'll like get on the hangboard, and I just like literally just sitting on the sofa, just being like, I don't really care. Like, I'm good. I don't know. So I don't know. I think part of it's just, yeah, what's going on and trying to find the next thing, you know, just seeing what sort of happens and, you know, what comes at me. Yeah, don't really know, what that's going to be. It's interesting. SJ and I just listened to the interview you did with Segrist.
Okay.
We actually just listened to it last weekend. So, and I was thinking of like, oh, I'm going to talk to Steven. And I was like, oh, man, this is going to be very different than Segrist. You know, he's so like awesomely methodical. And, you know, I mean, he's just like, it's so great, you know. I mean, he's like sets these goals and he trains specifically for them, and he's just analytical in his own way, you know. It's so different than even my approach, and I don't know. It was really interesting to listen to his and just like kind of like think about mine, and you know, and our approaches, how they are a little different, you know. But
man, that is my favorite part of this. It's fascinating to me. It's fascinating to me how different people navigate the world, navigate climbing, navigate progressing at climbing, what motivates them, all of that.
Yeah, no, there's no one way about it. Yeah, no, it is one of the great things about the sport. It's just like there's no recipe for success. There's some clues, you know, there's some variables that you can plug in there, but I don't think if there was a recipe, you know, it'd be so much easier, right? But there's so many other factors that you don't get to control, and I think that's what sort of makes it interesting. It's just like you kind of got to play the cards you're dealt and play them as well as you can. And actually the people I admire most are the people that more or less have played the cards that they were dealt the best that they can. It's not the ones that always win. It's the ones that were like, oh, they were really smart about it. And I think I saw that a lot climbing in Patagonia over the years, where that was just like, you know, you get a weather window and it is like all of these different options, right? And it's like, do you go big? Do you go all in and try some huge objective? Or do you be like, no, I'm gonna hang back and I'm gonna see what happens the first day, or I'm gonna let things dry off and then try this. And it really was a bit of a card game, right? Of just sort of like trying to input all these variables and then be like, okay, what's our highest probability of reward right now? Like, what is the objective we're gonna do that is really gonna like give us the highest reward? And that's really hard. You know, I think that's a really hard equation to always have success at. And, you know, I saw a lot of people that they would come down there with these grand goals. They'd show up, be like, we're going to do this. And, you know, and be like, sure you are. Like, you know, and I just thought it was more or less a poor approach, because they sort of often would go all in on this project and, well, it's just like the variables weren't there. Like they had no chance. They weren't dealt the cards, right? And so as opposed to just like playing the cards you were dealt and making the most of that situation that you have right then, they were already set on playing it this way, and then they lost. They walked away with nothing, you know? And I think my approach was always different. My approach was just like, okay, what's going on right now? Like, what can we do that's going to give us, I would say the highest reward in this current time? And I think that led to a lot of successes, because then it's sort of like if you sit there and play the game enough, you are going to walk away with some big wins, right? Because you're playing all the time. And I mean, I know I was lucky because, you know, I could do that. I went to Patagonia for 10 or 11 seasons. So inevitably I was going to have some big rewards just because I played the game enough. And not everybody has that opportunity, right? I mean, they just don't get to sit down and be like, cool, deal me in again, you know? And so, you know, but again, that's got to be part of your equation. It's just like, well, okay, I only get a certain amount of opportunities, you know, how big do I go? You know, and I think it almost like Seagrass sort of touched on that too, of like kind of picking, right, you know, objectives and getting some successes so you feel better about yourself. And yeah, but I think that's something I've been generally pretty good at, of setting a sort of realistic goal that's attainable. And maybe I've missed out on some bigger sort of things because I played my cards a little bit more conservatively. Hard to say. Yeah.
That's interesting. One idea I've been kind of thinking about a lot lately, and it came into my mind talking to Jonathan, and it's coming to my mind again with you, is it's just interesting how different climbers think about balancing investment for long-term success versus how do I make the most of what I'm doing right now. And something that just popped into my mind, you know, you're talking about spending 70 days toiling on Middle Cathedral. I've been hanging out with my friend Charlie Egan down here, and he reminded me of a story. I think he was climbing with you, and this is a couple summers ago up in Oregon. And I think you had told him, you know, he was like maybe picking your brain, like what helped you break into 514 sport climbing? Like you just kind of decided to become a sport climber and then you started smashing it. And you're like, oh, I just didn't spend a whole summer toiling on a wall, and instead I actually did a little bit of training, and sure enough I got better. So I'm curious about that. I'd love to hear maybe at the time, what led to that decision, and kind of how you think about what you just spoke to with Patagonia in a more zoomed out sense. Like, how do you think about how do I make the most out of what I'm doing or my opportunities right this second versus, when is it time to kind of take a back seat and kind of invest in myself for my future, that sort of thing?
Yeah, and I guess don't get me wrong, like, I don't want to come off also short-sighted, it's interesting, right? Because, like, I don't set long-term goals, but I end up achieving them in a way, right? Mm-hmm. And I do what's in front of me at the time, and I make these short-term goals, and they all ultimately, like, lead to larger objectives. It's just a slightly different approach, I pick short-term objectives first, and then those direct me for my long-term goals, as opposed to like choosing a long-term goal and it like sort of then dictating my short-term things.
Got it. So the short-term goals, more often than not, they have some element of like, how is this going to help me progress as a climber?
100%. I couldn't tell you what that exact goal is that I'm moving towards at the time, because it maybe hasn't presented itself yet. But ultimately, though, I know if I've achieved all these sort of short-term goals and I've done all the building blocks, when I come to find out the thing that I really am psyched on, I will be prepared, right? Regardless, sort of thing, right? Like, it doesn't matter, as long as I did all my homework, I'm going to be so well-rounded enough that I'll be able to do that. It's like the building the pyramid versus building the antenna, right? Like, I've always been a believer in building the pyramid. Like, it's way harder to knock down a pyramid than it is an antenna, period, right? Like, you look at something with a base that's, 100 feet wide versus something with a base that's like 2 feet wide, it's just like, that's physics, right? And, I think I've definitely approached, my climbing the same way. And I think people are then often surprised when I sort of do something quickly or like climb what some people think is hard, because they're like, wow, but you didn't really like, spend all that time, doing that one thing. And I'm like, well, I did. It's just that, like, I did it separated by a bunch of time, I built the pyramid, and I've let, all those other experiences, they help then when I went to climb 514, it's just like I was able to draw on all these other aspects of climbing that allowed me to do it. I didn't, I wasn't going to work up to 514 via the antenna. It's like I already built a pyramid. And so, yeah. I think that's definitely like, this sort of approach I've had, and yeah, I had to sort of recalibrate to climb 514. But more specifically, what sort of like led to that, well, I actually tore my ACL in a skiing.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay, I'd forgotten about
injury.
that.
Yeah, so obviously that changes everything. That's like all of a sudden she's like, oh, okay, well, I can't work. And, my line of work, I got to be able to hike and climb and do all these things, and I can't adventure climb. It's just not safe enough. And it was, I don't know, probably literally like a week after I hurt my knee, I was just like, okay, cool, I'm going to climb 514 now. This is my chance. Because I never had time. I was always distracted by all these other things and just, kind of moving around. And I was like, okay, I've got the time. I'm going to have the energy. I can't work, And so it was like, this makes the most sense. This is the time to do it. And, I don't want to say, I didn't go all in on training. That would, I learned how to train. I'm totally what I consider a novice, at training, but it was a great opportunity to just be like, okay, I'm going to learn how to do this part now. And again, I think it almost goes back to how I've approached things, right? It's just like, okay, what makes the most sense right now? And for me, that was obvious. It was like, I hurt myself. I should learn how to train. Perfect. I've always wanted to do this part, and now I've got the time. And it was great. I was able to start calling one of my close friends, Josh Wharton, who is definitely a training master, who is an incredible wealth of knowledge. And so to be able to just call him up or text him and just be like, okay, man, what's the deal? I want to learn how to do this. And so he was able to sort of spoon feed me the basics. And yeah, I really just spent months in the gym. It's all I did. I did PT, and then I would just go to the gym and train, and that was it. And it was awesome. I joke, and it was like the best thing that ever happened to my rock climbing was tearing my ACL.
Yeah.
That was it. Yeah, it gave me this opportunity, like where I don't want to say most people, I think a lot of people could be so bummed. They're like, oh my gosh, I tore my ACL. It's totally going to ruin my climbing season. Like, I might not be able to do this and that for a long time. And man, I mean, literally, like, I'm such a better climber now because of that accident. I mean, I'm so much stronger. I've done so much more in the last like couple years than I did previously. Like, and I think a lot of it was just having the time, you know, not being able to work and just being like, okay, like I need to get stronger. And it's something that I'd never really trained and I'd never really gotten strong relative to my own ability. Like I kind of, you know, was up close towards my natural ability pretty easily, but pushing beyond that level and really sort of, you know, putting that work in to get stronger than what just, you know, was sort of natural to me. Like I'd never done. I just never approached climbing that way. And so, I mean, honestly, it was awesome. Like it was so cool to like see the gains that I could make. You know, I didn't really know.
Gains. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I had no idea. You kind of think is like, so I'd been at that point climbing 25 years or 26 years or something. One would assume that you're not really going to see a lot of gains, right? After that much time, you're like, oh, I'm probably as good as I'm ever going to be. But I mean, I honestly, like I had the exact opposite experience. Like, I mean, I was able to just start seeing gains, just like boom, 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 boom. And yeah, I mean, I feel pretty fortunate. It led to like a pretty easy path to 514. Like it wasn't a struggle by any means.
I can attest to that for sure.
Yeah. It was just like, okay, cool. Like I'm going to do that. But again, it was just like, I put that other building block in there, you know, that was like one of the pieces that was missing from my climbing ability was just like being strong. I mean, being strong is definitely part of it. You know, I mean, you have to be strong, but if you never take the time to focus on getting strong, it's hard to do. Like every other little aspect of climbing. And so, I mean, no, it was great. It definitely like was like, okay, like I got to work on this more. And I don't know if I realized how much I was lacking in just strength.
Interesting.
You know, I mean, I think my technique is quite good, you know. I mean, after so many years of climbing, it's like I would hope so. And the style of climbing that I've done, but it shows that I was just like I just wasn't strong enough. Like I had this skill to climb 514 ages ago, for sure, 100%. I just didn't have the strength. And that was all it took. So it was cool to see that, like, sort of like, just like drop that little piece in there and be like, oh, okay, that's what was missing. And I would say, you know, kind of the same thing, you know, sort of happened with bouldering. It was also just like, okay, I've never really done this, and that's probably why I'm not that good at it. And it was cool to like, you know, be able to focus on that. Just this last winter, it was kind of, I was like, okay, I'm going to boulder. You know, we moved down to Reno, Nevada, so we were close to Bishop. And it just, again, it sort of made sense. It was like, oh, this is the thing that we should go do. You know, I'm going to have the winter off. That's the best bouldering season. It really lined up with my work as far as I could start training throughout the kind of the end of my work season. And so hopefully all the timing would work out. And it did, you know, but it was cool to drop another little like piece into the puzzle, you know, because I think bouldering was like one of the most obvious pieces that I was lacking, and I still for sure am lacking. I mean, for me V10 was the like immediate goal, but by no means the goal. Like I think that's where I wanted to start, but hopefully I would like to focus on that a little bit more. I mean, I think I need to because I mean, 6 weeks of it. I mean, like I didn't learn that much, you know. I mean, I didn't get that good at it. It's like, sure, I did some things that might be considered hard for some people, for sure. Like, I mean, V10 is obviously like is hard rock climbing, but that, you know, it's all personal, right? It's how hard can I climb for myself, not versus others. And so I think for me, like V10 was just like the first step, and that was not. That was not the limit by any means for me, I think. So it was good. It was good. Yeah, it was a good motivator. It was also just cool to like, after so many years, to sort of have an aspect of climbing that I hadn't really put that much energy into.
Was that kind of the one?
I mean, I would say out of anything, sure. Yeah. I'd spent less days bouldering in my life than any other form of climbing. I mean, I'd spent more days ice climbing. Ugh. You know, like, I mean, I've probably spent more days like dry tooling. You know, I just I don't boulder. Like, I just like, I mean, I owned a bouldering pad so I could sleep on it in my van. Like literally, like that's why I bought a bouldering pad. It never came out of the van to go bouldering. I would do it to go just be social or something, and I would boulder a little bit down in Cheltenham, like in between weather windows. But that's like, yeah, it's different. There was no intent through any of that, and so to have this like sort of thing, kind of like training, that I was just like, okay, I've never done that. Cool. Like what do I get to learn from it? And also just to see those gains. It's so rewarding, right? When there's something new, it's really easy to like make the gains. And
well, let's go to that, because I know that there's someone out there that's like, oh, please ask him what he actually did, what he's doing with your training. And we don't have to cover it too exhaustively, but I am curious. You and I had several conversations about it as Smith when you were, I think, had just done Scarface, or you were working on it. And I kind of remember, and fact check this, but I remember you had a really simple program. It sounded like it was just kind of some max hangs and weighted pull-ups.
Yeah,
Is that true?
Definitely simple relative to something like, Jonathan's again. Like I was a novice trainer, right? So I had to sort of start with the foundational sort of stuff. And actually, so right after I tore my ACL and I started going to the gym and kind of learning how to hangboard, essentially, I mostly just did a pretty classical repeaters.
Okay.
I actually just used the Beastmaker app.
Oh,
because
okay.
I think it's still what I recommend, because people ask me now like I'm some sort of authority, and I'm just like, oh man, I'm not an authority. Go ask somebody that really knows. I can tell you what I did, but that is far from being an authority. But it was the easiest to follow. I looked at like the Andersons, manual, and I was just like, I think I read the intro, and it was just like, I was so turned off. I was like,
it's like a textbook for rock climbing.
I do
training.
Not climb for the same reasons those dudes climb.
Interesting.
Like we are very different climbers. And so I was like, no. So I was like, what's simple here? And so I just did standard, 7 on, 3 off, 7 hangs sort of things, repeaters, classic, high volume, nothing special. I started doing, weighted pull-ups, working on, usually I was like 3 or 4 rep max sort of things. So pretty high weight, low volume. One of the things I was concerned about, that I've struggled with is I'm short, right? So I have to reach farther between the holds. And like talking to my buddy Josh, he's like, well, you need to like work on your power and your lock-off strength, And so a good way to do that is just with weighted pull-ups, and especially max. My endurance was fine. You'll get endurance, So doing a setup, working on the max pull-ups. Learned how to do muscle-ups. Again, a thing that's super important if you're short, I think, because
interesting.
One of that hardest movements is when you say you lock off on a pull-up bar, how do you push that to your waist? Like that movement is pretty hard. You don't really get that. It's kind of like campusing. Yeah. But I find campusing, it's like not that controlled. You can kind of throw your body, which is fine and all when you're throwing to a big hold, but like a muscle up, like a pure one when you're not kipping, is so much more controlled. So I think ultimately for non-dynamic climbing, which say is like Scarface, right? Like those are really long moves, but you have to be super precise. Like if I was just campusing, I don't think it would have been as beneficial, because I would, like throwing to the mono, you can't throw to the mono. You have to like lock off.
Yeah, they're odd holds too. You kind of have to nuance all of them. You don't just slot your fingers right in there.
Totally. Yeah, you got to be precision. And so I actually think working on the muscle ups was really, really helpful for that.
That's interesting.
Just like
Jonathan was kind of training the same thing with a cable pull down machine. He was describing kind of like training your low hand on the campus board with like a tricep extension pull down sort of thing. Yeah.
Yep. Which I think that is the move, right? That's the hardest move in a muscle up, right? Is transitioning from your armpits to your waist, right? It's kind of like doing, you can spend some time on the dips thing, but it's a slightly, when you're doing dips, the bars are fixed, right? So it's just different. And then I think the mechanics of taking your hands sort of thumbs up, if you will, to sort of thumbs down. Where if you're on a dip machine, they're always just sort of that thumbs down, sort of like, right? So it's a little different, and
sure.
So I do think those were super helpful. And man, those things are hard if you didn't grow up being a gymnast, and they're hard to make look good.
Right.
And I totally became that guy in the gym that would record himself.
I think that is so helpful. It's funny to me. I think people still don't want to do that because it feels egotistical or whatever it is, but do it because you want to get better. Using your phone to film yourself and then reviewing, I think, is one of the best tools you can possibly do for climbing or for what you just spoke to, improving strength movements and your form, whatever it is. But I think that is a totally underutilized tool.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you look at
And who
most
cares what other
professional
people
sports, like that's a no-brainer, right? I mean, like,
Right, yeah.
Of course they record everybody. Like, I mean, a track athlete, like, you know, a baseball pitcher, like, they're definitely reviewing their form via video, you know, 100%. So yeah, as climbers, I think you're totally right. Like, I mean, I think it's super helpful, and it's like something that, you know, people should do more of. And I think there's just like such a negative connotation to it almost, because people think you're recording yourself to, like, you know, spray about it or post it on the internet or something like
Put
that.
on
you
Instagram.
Know? Yeah. But it's just like, I mean, that's the last thing I want to do is like show myself on Instagram doing a muscle up. I'm just like, oh God, I'm way
That's
too
not quite,
dorky. Like,
that's not totally on brand for you.
no, oh God, no. But I do, you know, I'd send it to, you know, a couple of my close friends, and we banter back and forth about,
James?
you know, form, and with James and Josh, and like, you know, I mean, I think that it's actually helpful for that, you know, it's just like, oh, you know, have somebody else be to look at you and be like, oh yeah, you know, if you tried this, or like, yeah, your form isn't perfect here, or things like that. And, you know, I think it totally helps, and it's being smart. You know, right? It's just
That's
like,
cool.
it's being smart. So anyways, yeah, I worked on the muscle ups, the repeaters. I worked on my front lever a lot too.
Okay. Interesting.
Which is funny because I don't think it's actually that important for the style of climbing I usually do. I think if I climbed at the Red, or I climbed in, you know, like the Hurricane, or, you know, these like super crazy horizontal places, like I should focus on it more. But being short, it's just like, it's just not that important, you know? I mean, yeah. A funny actually anecdote about this is I had never really tried to do a front lever. Like, it wasn't a thing. And when I was working on free solo, you know, Honnold would like train after a full day of climbing, and, you know, we'd have these sort of training days, and he was working on his front lever, and, you know, he's like, oh, can you do one? I'm like, I don't know. I've never tried. And I like pull on, and I like pretty much just do a front lever, you know? And I'm like talking to him, and I was like, but I don't know, is this how you're supposed to do it? And he's just like, huh? What? You know, he's
like, what the hell,
literally,
dude?
What the hell? And he, you know, classic Honnold, he's like, you know, he's totally competitive in a healthy way. Like, Honnold's like, he's the right sort of competitive. It's awesome. He wants to be better, but he doesn't want you to be worse.
Yeah, totally.
Right? Like,
That's
he's
awesome.
happy if you get better. He just wants to be better than you're better. You know, like, that's all that matters, which is cool. I mean, I think it's actually, it's fun being competitive with him.
Well, and it is uniquely aggravating when you've been training something in particular and someone else just kind of like on-sides it, you know?
Yeah. Well, especially to him.
Yeah.
Because he's not used to that, right? I mean, there's a guy that is so not used to being, you know, the best at everything, or like just naturally really good at it. And yeah, so it was pretty funny. Like, when I just did it, and he was just like, oh, okay, well, you can't be better at that than me, you know? And so he like totally, you know, like motivated them, which is great. That's it, right? I mean, that's perfect in a way. Like, you know, it motivated him.
It's awesome.
You know, and so, yeah.
So you've alluded to your height a couple times. I've heard you say that, you know, most people think I'm 5'7", and it kind of pisses me off because I'm actually not. How tall are you?
I'm 5'3".
Yeah. Yeah,
totally. No, I mean, I'm on the shorter side in the climbing world, you know? I mean, I'm not like a full-on outlier, I would say. I mean, I'm pretty average height to most women, really. So, you know, but it's like I'm not a female, so I don't have those advantages.
That's interesting. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, if you start to look at some of the, you know, the research like the Lattice guys are doing, as far as like how strong, you know, you have to be, you know, and how they're testing people, right? Like, they've got all these sort of different things. It's flexibility, it's overall strength, it's, you know, and they've put all this into sort of the equation and found some averages where it says, okay, well, if you want to climb 514, the average 514 climber can hold on to this hold for this long. They can, they're this flexible, they're, you know, these things. And then, you know, I believe, and I haven't actually read the all the stuff myself. I've looked at it a little bit, but essentially, like, the shorter you are, the stronger you have to be relative to your ability, right? Like, I have to be able to hold more weight on a max hang to be able to climb 514 than somebody that's taller than me.
Right, and just to be totally clear, you mean relative strength, relative to your body weight.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Obviously, like, if I could do the same amount as somebody that's like taller than me, you know, like.
Right.
I mean, but that is sort of what you need to do, you know. So relative to my body weight, I need to be able to do more. Well, it seems like, though, then if you look at like the female sex, like, for them to climb 514, they don't actually have to be as strong. And the same goes with height. So essentially, like, the shorter you are, and if you're a male, you just actually have to be stronger on average to climb 514. And again, like, you should fact check me on this, but I'm pretty sure, because I found it definitely like, oh, I mean, it was motivating and unmotivating. It's like, damn it, do I actually just have to be stronger? But you can fix that, you know. I mean, we can just get stronger. So
I'd be curious to see, do you know if they hypothesized other factors? I mean, was it because the flexibility tended to be higher on average for women, or do you know?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure exactly what the sort of causation. Right.
They're
I mean, I
just
think
smarter
there's a correlation, but yeah. I mean, okay. One could assume, yeah. It's like flexibility is often, not always. You know, these are such generalizations.
Totally.
Maybe their balance is better, their movement is better. You know, things like that can make up for it. So I don't know. I mean, yeah. I'm not sure how we just got on this track.
I know, totally. I'll be sure to find that
trouble.
article, though. Yeah, I know. I'm a little bit nervous, too.
Yeah, if I'm wrong, you're going to edit all this out, right? If I'm right, it stays in.
Okay, perfect. I'll be sure to link to that article in the show notes.
But I mean, I can look at my girlfriend. Essentially, she's climbed V10 and 514, more or less a pretty similar time frame as me. I mean, she climbed her first 514, maybe it was 6 months after I did. She climbed her first V10 the same season. And if we go toe to toe on a hangboard or weighted pull-ups or anything like that, like, I'm definitely stronger. I mean, it's obvious. I mean, I'm watching her, and, you know, I mean, we're next to each other on the hangboard, so, right? We're training at the same times often. Like,
are you guys the same height?
She's a half inch taller than me.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a super interesting comparison there. That's super interesting.
No, I've got a little bit more of a reach on her.
Yeah.
I think I've got an inch on her. I'm a plus 2.5 or 2 ape index. So I do have that going for me for sure, but she's a little taller, right? So, I mean, our reach isn't that different. And we've actually, like, you know, one of the routes we did together is Mr. Yuck, which was a 514 at Smith Rock, right? So, I mean, there was a pretty good A-B sort of thing right there, you know? And, I mean, I could probably like, just look at weighted pull-ups. It's like, I don't know the percentages, but, you know, her 3 rep max is probably 35 pounds or something like that. My 3 rep max is like 85, 90. You know, like, okay, like, same thing with weighted hangs. It's like, you know, if I go from my, you know, sort of max hang, sort of like 7 seconds on, you know, 2.5 minutes off sort of thing, like, so on like a, you know, 16 millimeter edge, right? So pretty standard. I think that's a pretty standard max hang routine, you know, and I'm up there at 80 pounds, and she's down there at 35 or 40.
That's fascinating.
So you would think, okay, like, I should be climbing much harder, right? But
yeah, you're both excellent rock climbers. You both have the tactics and the skill side of it dialed. Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah, no, I mean, I am stronger than her. I mean, that part's undeniable. You know, right now we're almost the exact same weight. I mean, so we are, like, very similar, you know? Yeah. Wow, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So, yeah.
I'm leaving this part in.
Yeah. Let's see. Do the research.
I will.
I don't know.
I'll fact check for sure.
I think if you just, again, it's sort of just looking at some of where their averages they've found, and I actually think some of that research they've done is really fascinating. Starting to get some more numbers as far as, like, what the average 514 climber, like where do they land?
Right.
Like what sort of things do they have to be good at, or what sort of range of things, do they have to be good at what level to essentially climb that grade, or, you can make up for it. Or, yeah, I mean, obviously there's ways to make up for it. I mean, I think Honnold did his test, and essentially, like, he's almost like an anomaly because, like, given his strength, he shouldn't be able to climb as hard as he can. I believe he actually tested like pretty low on overall like finger strength and things like that. Like overall strength, I don't think he's like incredibly high relative to his ability. He's one of those people. But then again, there's like the mental component, right? That is the equalizer, right? There is this sort of component of just like, how hard you can try, how much experience you have, and things like that that makes it probably pretty hard to get a very accurate, perfect model, because it's climbing, right? It's there are other factors involved besides just pure strength. That was a good tangent.
That's great. That's fascinating. Let's jump back to your bouldering. So it does sound like you learned a lot this season. Your goal was to climb V10. I think you did at least 4 of them, maybe more. But I'd be curious, you learned a lot, but is there anything that you can kind of put into words that you learned that you'd be able to pass on to maybe people in a similar boat, maybe trad climbers or alpine climbers that have done a lot of adventure climbing, that sort of thing, and have never really jumped into bouldering and don't really care to, or haven't really thought of like what it might actually do for them as a climber?
Well, I mean, I think this would be obvious to most boulders, but maybe to like, non-boulders is like, you have to try really hard. Like one of the most basic, sort of keys to success in bouldering is the willingness to just try hard. And a lot of people struggle to tap that level of try hard. Because it's almost like a lot of people are pretty good at going to 90% try hard or even lower, and then they're just like, okay, that was as hard as I can try. And they never learn how to like really go harder. And I mean, I think you see that a lot with like trad climbers, just partially due to the hesitation to maybe be falling, or it's just like you approach a climb very differently than you would like a boulder problem, where like most people that say trad climb a lot would not go up to a route and expect that they're going to fall off of it 30 times. But in bouldering, that's like totally normal, right? Like, and to have like success, like it, generally speaking, you have to try super, super hard. And I mean, I know that's something that I was aware of, and it's something that, I've probably tapped into, a handful of times, while climbing, but it's not like I'm great at it. I don't fall into like the Adam Ondra category of like try hard, where he goes 100% every single time, like that's it, right? Like I am a lot more reserved, but in bouldering, you don't get a dog through it, right? I mean, you have to climb the move. So generally speaking, it's like, if it's hard enough for you, you're going to have to try really, really hard. And so, I mean, I think it just helps you engage that sort of muscle as far as just being like, oh, right, I got to actually try hard. Because it's funny. I mean, you go out there and you see people that aren't doing great, and you're just like, whoa, you didn't actually try that hard. Like I can tell, like you just didn't try hard. Like, what do you expect? And I think for me, it was a good reminder to go out there and just be like, right, I got to go for it, And I think if you watch some of the videos that I would send to James, I'd be like, hey, how do I look, And I mean, I think I was trying hard,
Yeah.
I started to like look like a boulderer, not that great, He showed it to Nina, his girlfriend, Williams, because I wanted the feedback. I was just
right.
like, do I look like a boulder yet? And I mean, she was like, nah, not, you're getting there, and it's true. Cause then I just watched, and I was like, oh, right.
Interesting.
Like, I don't look like a boulder yet because I'm not trying hard enough. I'm not looking, I don't, like I'm sort of like climbing where I think I should climb, or I've got this sort of, this governor that's just like, oh, that's as hard as you can try, because that's where I'm used to it, right? That's the standard and the expectation I've set. And it's hard then to change that, right? To be like, no. Like, I know that's what you thought was try hard, but you actually need to like engage this other part. And bouldering, you can do that, right? It's which is so cool about it, because you can try things over and over. It's, close to the ground. There's not as many sort of factors like when you're, alpine climbing or something, which is the realm where like you generally don't want to be pushing up towards that limit as far as like try hard, because generally speaking, as you reach your upper threshold of try hard, it's really hard to focus on all the other things. And in alpine climbing, you need to be aware of like all those other factors as far as like safety goes. And you don't want to be like falling off. You don't want to be up there like whipping off something 30 times just because it's just not really safe to be doing that. So, but in bouldering, you really get to. So I think, just pushing that, your own personal envelope of what you think is possible is so cool. Like, I mean, and I think that's why then, it helps your sport climbing so much, right? Because you've pushed that edge out a little bit farther. So then when you're sport climbing, you can like, what used to be hard for you, sort of try hard, is not as hard anymore because you've elevated your overall level. So
I'm curious about that. Did you have a chance before COVID, before this kind of whole shift, to do some route climbing of any kind? And were you able to see or feel that kind of shift from the season of bouldering?
No, unfortunately, it was like I kind of I went from bouldering to like cold turkey. I went
damn.
I mean, I've not really climbed since the end of January, I guess. Like I've barely climbed since then. I had a long work gig down in Chile for all of February. Just had some other circumstances. I guess, the last time I feel like I was really rock climbing, it was when I saw you, up on Moonlight Buttress. I mean, that was it, which that part, that's not like, I wouldn't really notice it, I guess. I mean, we did go to the Grail. I think that's where we were. We went to the Grail and I got to do some sport climbing. And I mean, it's so hard to tell because I hadn't really climbed in over a month. It had been about 5 weeks. About no training, no climbing, like very little output. So I couldn't really tell if I was benefiting at all from any of the bouldering. But I mean, I was able to like flash a couple things that would normally be a bit hard for me. So I was like, maybe I'm still seeing some byproduct. But at that point, I couldn't say there was any real, correlation or anything like that. So unfortunately, the way things worked out, I don't really know. And, I was also pretty beat down from all that bouldering. I felt it in my hands. I just felt it in my body. I was getting achy. I am getting kind of older. I'm 40 now, so I would lie to say that I don't have, sore rotator cuffs and joints and things like that. I mean, I just can't do as much as that I used to be able to do without hurting myself, and I have to be really, really careful, especially as I get deeper into the season. My volume just has to start going down. I just can't do as much, I just run the risk of hurting myself, which would be counterproductive. So,
gotcha.
So it'll be interesting to see, I mean, hopefully it'll sync up and I'll be able to go bouldering at some point and then see how it more directly relates to sport climbing or trad climbing or big wall free climbing for that matter. But, I don't think all those gains are lost, Again, we just dropped another, sort of piece into the pyramid. That's not just going to go away.
Yeah, totally.
I hope. And, I would say, now that we're living in Reno, we plan on spending more time in Yosemite again and probably climbing back up on El Cap a bit more and doing some free climbing up there. And often a lot of that climbing does just come down to bouldering. I mean, El Cap the cruxes are boulder problems. Like, I mean, that's it. I mean, most granite climbing for that matter, unless you're just talking some pure splitters. But once you get past the 512 grades and you get into 513 and harder, it comes down to how hard you can boulder. It's not endurance. It's, generally you've already got the techniques. So, which, I mean, was one of the reasons I was like, okay, cool, I should do some more bouldering, as we sort of, SJ and I planned on climbing on El Cap a bit more again. I was like, I need to work on that aspect. So we'll see. Hopefully it helps a little bit.
That's it for part 1. I hope you enjoyed it. Part 2 will go live next week. I appreciate you all. Much love. Stay safe out there. We'll see you next time.
it up, stop when the clock hits 13. Sing 1, 2, 3, 4. Cause no one can do it like we do it, like we do it, like we do it. Cause no one can do it like we do it, like we do it, like we do it. Cause no one can do it like we do it, like we do it, like we do it. Cause no one can do it like we do it, like we do it, like we do it.